Greetings, students. Welcome to the second part of the lecture on doing sociological research in the context of technology and society. In the last lecture, we looked at the concept of big data, looking at a more quantitative understanding of linkages of data. We talked about ontologies, linked data, big data, so on and so forth. In this part of the lecture, we are going to take a more qualitative stance, a more qualitative understanding of data and doing social research in the context of the advent and the usage, extensive usage of technology, and what it means for us doing social research in that context. So, to start with, what you see on the screen is four quadrants that talk about the forms of data. And if you look at the quadrant A, which is the form of data is qualitative and it's analyzed qualitatively, you see that we have examples of interpretive text studies, for example, hermeneutics, grounded theory, phenomenology, and so on and so forth. In the quadrant B, you see the form of data being quantitative and the form of analysis being qualitative. And this is represented in, as search for and presentation of meaning in results of quantitative processing. And quadrants C and D talk about, qualitative. So quadrant C talks about qualitative forms of data with an analytical perspective of quantitative methods, for example, turning words into numbers, like classic content analysis, word counts, free lists, pile sorting, etc. And quadrant D talks about a purely quantitative form of data with quantitative form of analysis, for example, statistical and mathematical analysis of numerical data. So coming back to the question of using qualitative techniques to understanding social research, using technology, using software, we go back as 1966 when Joseph Rabin, professor of English at Queen's College in the City University of New York, founded the journal Computers and the Humanities. And this journal was founded to report on significant new research concerning the application of computer methods to humanities scholarship. So, what Rabin talked about is bridging this gap, in which in my previous lecture I had voiced the concern by C.P. Snow, that there is a gulf of incomprehension. And this is one of the efforts, this journal is one of the efforts that has been to sort of bridge this gap of incomprehension. And Rabin in 1966 actually puts forward this quote, and I quote, "We need never be hypnotized by the computer's capacity to count into thinking that once we have counted things, we understand them." So Rabin's powerful quote that you just read goes a long way to talk about the importance, the significance of a qualitative understanding that lies, even beyond the application of technology, application of digital means, software in social research. So, just to give a very brief background of qualitative research for students who are not familiar with the growth and evolution of qualitative research in social sciences. So, qualitative methods, we see the growth, the evolution primarily coming from, pioneered by the Chicago School of Thought. And this school of thought looked at social research in a more qualitative understanding, given the moment of increasing waves of immigration into the United States. Goes as back as 1918, where we have this classic work of the Polish peasant in Europe and America. And then till up to the 1980s, mid 1980s, most social research was conducted following the natural science principles or of experimental design, statistical analysis, and so on and so forth. The methodological revolution in social sciences comes in around the 1980s, 1990s. The qualitative revolution, that is, comes in to look at more and more understanding of how lifestyle patterns change, how living conditions change, how relations between people change. And this moment is actually captured in this paradigm shift, starting 1980s, that you see, more and more journals being introduced that appreciate and encourage the use of qualitative forms of data analysis, the application of technology or software or other digital forms to understanding, make meaning of qualitative data. So, one of the principles that have been guiding qualitative research in social sciences is the principle of asking a good research question. And asking a good research question has, a very fundamental ingredient in it. And this fundamental ingredient is called the principle of 5 Ws. And so, what are the 5 Ws that one needs to look at when framing a good research question in social sciences, humanities perspective? So, these 5 Ws are the who, the what, the when, the where, and the why. So, who refers to the research population and research sample that you're looking at. The what refers to the research questions components. The when is the incorporation of the time component into your particular study. The where is delimiting your study in a particular context, and this context can be geographical or social. And the how and the why is the research question component or the research goal. Now, oftentimes, qualitative research is guided by the principles of grounded theory methodology. And if you recall from my previous lecture, we talked about the research circle, that there are primarily two types of research design that you can think of. One is a deductive form of research, one is an inductive form of research. And grounded theory methodology is a good example of an inductive form of research that, you start with looking at what your data is talking about. So you have a research question and you start collecting your data and let your data speak. This is one of the mantra that the grounded theory methodology follows. So what followed, after that is with the advent or the extensive usage of the digital and its application into social science research, the idea of how we analyze and represent knowledge using an analysis, using an understanding from qualitative data, sort of started to take a more sophisticated shape. So, one good stage that the understanding of data when it's primarily qualitative, one good starting point is to look at how we make concept maps. Now, concepts, as we know, are the building blocks of theory. So, concepts are symbolic or abstract elements that represent objects, properties, features, processes, phenomena, and concepts can have a symbolic dimension and they can also have a definitional dimension. So you can define a concept and you can also exemplify a concept using a symbolic element. And therefore, what becomes more clear is that concepts are fluid. There are some concepts which are grand concepts, that can have a macro level definition, but there are concepts, that are more fluid in nature. For example, if you take the concept of family as a social science concept, so family has been one of the long-standing social institutions that social scientists, sociologists have been studying. And family, if you want to look at family as a concept, you need to provide a definition of the family, because the understanding or the operation of family across the world is not identical. So what family means in geographical location A, or a cultural context A, may not be what family means in cultural context B. So it is important that if there is a shifting understanding or a fluidity in a concept, it matters to have a definition of that concept. So concept mapping has been one of a very good starting points to look at where we start to represent the data, or how we understand that data and how we analyze that data. And software, which I'm going to talk about in a little bit, have made this journey a little more sophisticated. So with software, we can now generate various types of concept maps, of mental maps, of how we think that these concepts are interrelated, how these concepts are operating in conjunction with each other. And so concept maps actually, in that context, takes us back to the discussion that we had in the previous lecture on the idea of ontology, how data sets are linked. Right. So how, is it a hierarchy that we are looking at? Is it a linear progression that we are looking at? Is it a cluster that we are looking at? So that sort of resonates. The idea of ontology sort of resonates in a concept mapping that evolves into an understanding of how, in the qualitative context, we generate a code tree. And I will talk about this code tree here. So, but before I go further up into talking about the code tree, I would encourage you to think of, if you have a question in mind, if you have a social context in mind, think of a concept map that you can produce with regard to that question that you have in your mind. So, what are the basic components in that question that you have? What are the core concepts? What are the allied concepts? How are the core concepts related to each other and with the allied concepts? So concept map actually helps in this journey. Now, moving on to an understanding of the forms of qualitative data in the context of the presence and the use of technology, we find that this data can be in a variety of forms, starting from text data, or whether it's images, whether it's a moving image or a still image. It can be sound, audio data, or it can also be driven by material objects. So we see a whole, and this is not an exhaustive list in which qualitative data can be present, but this is just an indicative list to understand the variety, the diversity of data, of qualitative data that can occur in any given social. So one way of, bringing in an example to talk about qualitative data in the context of the digital, in the context of technology, is to, for example, imagine looking at relations between social life, which is online, and its analysis that are changing in the context of digitization. So, we have, a bounty of social network sites, we have networked communities, we have digital archives, We have social media activism ongoing. We have, the existence of a variety of software, and so to look at the relation between how social life has been informed by the context of the digital is something that qualitative data gives us a moment to reflect on. So, in this context, we can go back to what Rabin in 1966 had commented on, that we need never be hypnotized by the computer's capacity to count into thinking that once we have counted things, we understand them, into bringing in an appreciation of the inclusion of thick data, or more qualitative, more ethnographically rich data, to talk about how it makes more or more sophisticated sense to look at data analysis if we look at a combination of both big and thick data. And this is a book that you can look up by Darius Jumel Naik. The title of the book is Thick Big Data, in which Jumel Naik talks about the nature of thick big data. And I quote, "In my view, big data not only can, but definitely should, be interpreted by thick data. The more quantified and powerful the data sets we use, the more important it is to use qualitative tools that improve our understanding of the outcomes. Unlike brick and mortar studies, quantitative digital research often raises more questions than answers, and without contextualization, it does not reveal its full potential." Close quote. So, what Jamal Naik is trying to propose here is that bringing in a qualitative understanding would sort of contextualize, would enrich and reveal a more fuller potential of the data that we are trying to make meaning of through this research. So, in this context, we have seen, the evolution, the growth of a variety of methods to talk about qualitative research, doing qualitative research with the advent of the digital. And one such method that has been talked about and engaged in has been the method of digital ethnography. So, digital ethnography outlines an approach to doing ethnography in contemporary world, which is primarily driven by the digital. So, what digital ethnography explores are the consequences of the presence of digital media in shaping the techniques and processes through which we practice ethnography, and accounts for how the digital methodological, practical, theoretical dimensions of ethnographic research are increasingly intertwined. So, digital ethnography looks at digital environments, looks at methods and methodologies that are redefining ethnographic practices. So there are classic works by digital ethnography that you can look up, where scholars have studied structural forms of inequalities on digital spaces, new forms of professional practices that social scientists have used to study networks and build conversations. But one of the key concerns that has been the extent to which algorithmic data has the capacity to enhance, change, or replace traditional qualitative and quantitative practice. So, as you may imagine, the more and more we go digital, the more and more we write algorithms, and this data is driven by algorithms and search engines, the more it becomes important for us to contextualize technology, to contextualize the digital, in this case, for example, the algorithm or the code, in the context of the social, in the context of how this algorithm or why this algorithm was written and employed, to have a fuller understanding of why this algorithm is sort of reaping this search result as it is doing. So this is what, going back to Jamel Naik's idea of thick big data, is that we have a whole host of big data that is guided by quantitative forms of data structures, but to make meaning of that quantitative data structures, which tells us the what, but they don't tell us the why and the how. We need to take a deeper look at some of the qualitative dimensions of these data sets. And in this context, I've used the example of algorithms. To understanding why something is occurring as a result, and further on in the explanation process. So I will discuss about some of the dimensions of algorithms in social contexts, in the digital context, in my next set of lectures. But here, I want to transition to the last part of my discussion by bringing in some of the very sophisticated, very key software that have been in the market for quite some time now, that help in the analysis of qualitative data. And by qualitative data, I mean the variety of forms of qualitative data I've talked about previously in this lecture. So what these software, and I talk particularly about one such software. So there is a whole host of software, for example, MaxQDA, for example, NVivo, for example, Atlas TI, so on and so forth, most of which offer you a trial period, maybe for a week or 2 weeks, so you can actually download and look up what the software do for you. There are also software like Tableau and Gephi that that are directed towards particular purposes of qualitative data analysis. There's also an open source software called Voyant Tools that give you a nice first level sort of analysis of qualitative data, particularly text data. But so Voyant Tools also helps you look at analyzing if you give a link, for example, link of a website, and put the link in the browser and do a sort of an analysis, it would give you an analysis of that particular web page. So there has been an evolution of software that have helped researchers to make more clearer understanding of qualitative research data. So if you, for example, look up MaxQDA, which has been in the market for the last 10 years at least, that MaxQDA is a 4-window software where you can analyze, code the data, you can retrieve the coded parts of the data, and then you can visually represent this data across a variety of toolkits that the software offers. So you can look at the linkages between the codes, between the subcodes. You can do a concept mapping with the software. You can, provide relations between nodes or codes, in the form of semantic networks, so on and so forth. NVivo also gives you similar features of analyzing qualitative data, whether it's text data or audio data. So one thing that these software have enabled is a better visualization of the data analysis process. And that is important because visualization has been very, very impactful, throughout the history of research. And if you are able to visualize your research in a particular way, it just becomes more clearer, more clearer in terms of inference, in terms of analysis, that you are able to convey what your data is speaking of. And let the data speak is one of the tenets of qualitative grounded theory research. So I want to conclude this part of my lecture, this topic on doing social research in the context of technology, in the context of the digital, is for you to reflect on a couple of questions, such as think of the questions, social research questions, that you are able to think of because of the presence of technology. In other words, if you have a research question in mind, would you be able to think of this particular question if technology was not present? Right? So, this is something that I would like you to reflect on, that, some of the questions, some of the research questions that are enabled because of the presence of technology, questions that could not be answered without the presence of technology. So that's one thing I want you to think about. The other area of question I would like you to reflect on is, does it matter which form of um, software you use to analyze your data set, whether it's qualitative or quantitative? So these are the two questions, broad questions, I want to leave you with to reflect on. And I take up the question of algorithms in the context of society, search engines in the context of society, in my next set of lectures on identities and inequalities. Thank you very much.